Contrary to popular belief, being a peasant wasn't actually a fun time. No, in fact, life was far from perfect, with many spending their lives as farmers, constantly dealing with a lack of food and income, along with other painful acts. Oh, and that's not even mentioning these 10 things they had to suffer through as well in their life as a medieval peasant. Now, I have some bad news for all you medieval peasants watching at home. The heater won't be invented until 1883, so sorry, you're gonna have to deal with some cold and rainy nights. And there were a lot of those. See, for the majority of the medieval period, peasants' houses usually consisted of one room with no windows and a thatch roof. Instead of a fancy machine to keep them warm, a fire was usually lit in a hearth in the middle of the hut, which as you can imagine leads to a smoky time. And then there was the animal corner, which consisted of about a third of the dwelling, where most people kept their livestock. And yes, I know y'all like living with pets, but I don't want to be woken up at 3 in the morning by your roommate, the goat. Beds and furniture were clunky and riddled with bugs and other vermin, and so bed bugs weren't an uncommon sight. So yeah, if you can't sleep without your nightlight, think about how they must have had it. But yes, it's still okay to sleep with a nightlight, I promise. It's hard to get through the day without a good meal. Believe me. And while most people can pick and choose what they want for lunch, peasants usually didn't have that choice. Instead, they got whatever they could, which the majority of the time was nasty. While stews and vegetables were popular food if you could afford it, things like hedgehogs, beavers, fish bladders, and whale vomit were on the menu, and I don't know about you, but none of those sound really all that tasty. Some people were even scrounging around in the trash for their meal and eating garbage. But not that garbage, this garbage. Yeah, it's a meal called garbage. If you're hungry, you won't be, because here's what you need if you want to prepare a nice bowl of garbage. First off, chicken heads, feet, livers, and gizzards. Now we're gonna mix it up, throw it into a nice pot, and add some beef broth, powdered pepper, cinnamon, cloves, mace, parsley, and sage. Then we're gonna take some bread, throw a loaf in the pot, boil it through a strainer, then let it boil again. Add some powdered ginger, unripe apple juice, salt, and a little saffron, and you've got some yummy garbage. Which I don't think is a sentence I ever thought I would say. Now there were tons of horrible things women had to endure in medieval times, but probably the worst was the expectation to either be wed and procreate, or become a nun. Now I can't speak for the women watching, or for any women in that matter, but in my opinion, becoming a nun sounds pretty tempting compared to the dangers of procreation back in those times. Now I know math usually isn't fun, but this statistic is another example of that, because childbirth would kill roughly 1 out of every 3 women, or about 33%. Today's rate is roughly 0.028%. And the sad truth was that there wasn't really much you could do to improve the situation. I mean, they're peasants, so hygiene was poor, birthing protocol wasn't fully established, and neither was maternal care. So people came up with all kinds of remedies to help women. And here's a shocker, most of them were kinda useless. There's a reason you don't see spouses smearing eagle poop all over their pregnant partner's belly. Physicians and doctors were also kinda useless, and the only help those giving birth would really get would be midwives, priests, or both surrounding the women and praying. No help, just please Lord, let them live. Yeah, it turns out that wasn't the best form of help. I hate paying my taxes as much as the next guy, but if you think it's complicated today, it is a cakewalk compared to what it was like in medieval times. Rules were constantly fluctuating, and depending on how the lord in charge was feeling, you could give up basically everything just because they felt like it. So for most peasants, they had to rely on the generosity of their lord and hope that he would fix taxation at a low rate, or if they were incredibly lucky, not be on them 24/7 about payment. But if you go around Europe, levels of taxation did of course vary between the different states. So a peasant in England's tax is going to be way higher than someone in a more relaxed area like Sweden. But the tricky thing is that a lot of peasants and tradesmen had irregular incomes. I mean, you can't always predict when someone is going to buy your stuff. And so if you were going through a rough time and didn't have the monetary value that your respective lord was hoping for, you could be in for a lot of trouble. And, as you're about to find out, punishment for something even as minuscule as that could lead to drastic consequences. So, what are those drastic consequences? Well, you're about to find out. And I'm going to preface this by saying you better be thankful you never had to witness any of these. And if you did, I'm deeply sorry, but you're also probably about 800 years old. Oh, here's a fun one. It's a trial by water. We're gonna tie your arms and legs together and throw you in a lake. If you float, you're guilty. If you sunk, you've likely drowned. But you're innocent! There was also the whole burned at the stake thing and the gibbet where people would hang for days as a warning. But most of the time if they found you guilty, it was a fine, a whip, the removal of a body part, or just straight up of the most common, and probably the most fun for other peasants to watch, was the pillory. What is the pillory? Well, the offender would be constrained around their back and their neck and be set at an awkward height to cause back pain, while the criminal was locked up in them. Then, the public would mock them, throw in rubbish and whatever they could find at them, which seems like a surefire way to get rid of some steam. Okay, so now picture this. You've been embarrassed in front of everybody at the pillory. Your buddy Steve just threw a tomato smack dab at your face, and you decide, yeah, now I'm gonna pack it all up and I'm gonna leave town. Yeah, good luck with that. See, records from that time show that a sizable proportion of people not only didn't get to travel to other countries, but they never even left their region or the village they were born in. Good luck trying to find a place to rest along the way, because accommodation was few and far between, and usually way too expensive for a typical peasant to afford. And that's not even mentioning the robbers, looters, and whatever or whoever else is out there to get you. Plus, if you're staying outside, hypothermia is a very real possibility. And to get from place to place, you'd have to traverse rivers and streams that were used for both sewage and for drinking. But people did this because while there was disease and it was rife, houses and makeshift dwellings were packed together inside the city limits, which offered safety in numbers and perhaps even the best chance to earn a bit of money. And if you're lucky, it could give you the opportunity to get away from Steve. I mentioned robbers and whoever else is out there, but there's a very real possibility that one of them had an affinity to ending people's lives. See, according to history, extra killings in medieval England were around 10 times more common than they are today. Roughly 46% of all deaths in men of adult age were caused by violence, so as a dude living in medieval England, you had a roughly 50% chance of meeting a bloody end. I'm not a gambling man, but I don't like those odds. For example, in 1229, some buddies went on a night out, and they do as you do when you go out with your buddies, you get plastered. They got into a disagreement over their tab, and it escalated until the students and innkeepers were in a brawl that caused the townspeople to come to the aid of the innkeepers. The next day, the boys came back, armed with swords. Some hacking and slashing later, and they'd unalived quite a few and removed some limbs in the process. And that's the thing. When you give people a sword who shouldn't have a sword, they do dumb things with the sword, which is exactly why I don't own a sword. But one place I think where it would be good to have a sword is in war, and I think that's a fair judgment. Well, I got some sad news. Not everybody was afforded that luxury. If the Lord saw fit and you were a man over the age of 18, you could be conscripted whenever. According to histories of the time, around 1 in 5 peasant men would be in military service at any one time. But contrary to popular belief, most fighting wasn't actually fighting, just sizing up your opponent before signing a treaty. But that's time you could be farming. Instead, here you are in your fancy suit fighting a battle for someone who doesn't even know you exist. You have to think about how little was in it for peasants. See, lords were often fearful of their peasants getting too powerful, which is why in most cases, they were required to bring their own weapons, and also learn to fight by themselves. So bring your pointiest shovel and your sharpest rake, because we're going to war. Oh, and now we're done at the war. Thanks for coming. I think I've got a pretty okay outfit here. I mean, this is a nice fleece, but if I'm living in medieval times, which luckily I'm not, my outfit wouldn't really be up to me. Oh, and it's a good thing I'm not wearing stripes. Because believe it or not, in medieval Europe, the simple act of wearing stripes could lead to your imprisonment, or even your death. Why? Well, quite simply, for some reason, striped clothes were seen as garments of the devil. So if you were caught dressing up as Waldo, who, yeah, I know, he wouldn't be released for another 700 plus years, you might end up with a noose around your neck. I'm not making this up. There are very real examples of this. In the French town of Rouen, a local cobbler was condemned to death simply because he'd been caught in striped clothes. If we go even further back, from the year 1250 onwards, the only people who would be caught wearing stripes were the lowest of the low in society. But it wasn't limited to just humans. Animals faced the wrath, but it's not like they had a choice. I mean, while most Europeans had never seen one, zebras were called beasts of the devil because of their stripes. And look at a zebra. There is nothing more evil than that, I'm sure. For our last point, I'm sorry, but I have some sad news. You've died. Yeah, but I have some even sadder news. Yep, your corpse, your earrings, your watch, your anything else of value. Yeah, it's all gone. But you wouldn't be alone. See, according to some research, in Europe during the Middle Ages, close to 40% of graves were disturbed. Now, this wasn't like grave robbing during the Enlightenment. There was no university, medical schools paying good money for fresh corpses to study. Rather, most cases of grave disturbances were just people looking for anything of value. People would be buried with a small selection of possessions. Maybe you got your favorite cup, maybe you got some other trinkets. But when times are tough, even something as small as that would be enough to tempt a thief or a peasant who just needs some money to dig up a grave. This led to a whole bunch of unmarked graves, which led to a whole lot of unanswered questions about the lives of people in those times, which led to a whole lot more things that I don't have time to talk about in this video. Oh, and one more time, I'm sorry that you died. Thanks again for watching Bumblebee, and let me know if you think you could make it as a peasant. I know I couldn't, but I'm also kind of a wimp. Please make sure to like this video, and for Bumblebee, I'm Ethan, and I'll see you in the next one.